Hello learners, welcome to this program Education Online. I am teacher Akena Patrick Omoy, a teacher of physics. Today we are going to look at optical instruments under the main topic lenses and optical instruments. So dear learners, what do we understand by optical instruments? So we say optical instruments are devices that changes the visual angle, Optical instruments are devices that changes the visual angle. So dear learners, what do we understand by the word visual angle? So visual angle refers to the angle subtended by the object to the human eye. Or we say visual angle is the angle subtended by an object to the eye. Visual angle is the angle subtended by an object to the eye. We mean the angle at which we can view an object from. So dear learners, if we have different objects placed at the same level on the ground, how do we view those objects, and how will the objects appear in our eyes or in the eye of an observer? So if we have different poles placed on a level ground, if this is a level ground, this is the ground, a level ground. So dear learners, if different poles are placed on this level ground, if this is pole 1, then if we have another pole of the same size, or we can say of the same height, so these are the 3 poles placed on this level ground. So this is pole 1, we call it P1. Then we have another pole P2, that is pole 2. Then we have another pole P3. So these are 3 poles of the same height placed on the same level road. So now if we have an observer at one point, an observer is the viewer, the person who is seeing the object. So this is observer. So now this observer is going to see these poles at different angles. So these poles will subtend different angles to the eye of this observer. Now this pole 3 will subtend an angle. This is the ray from the pole to the eye of the observer. So now this ray will subtend a certain angle to the eye of this observer. So if we call this angle theta, then also the second pole will also subtend a certain angle to the eye of the observer. Meaning the observer is going to view, the angle at which the observer will view pole 2 will be different from the angle at which the observer views pole 3. So now a ray of light from pole 2 will also enter the eye of the observer in this direction. So this is a ray of light from pole 2 to the eye of the observer. So this ray subtends a certain angle which is different from the angle which is subtended by pole 3. So we can call this angle alpha. So that is the angle subtended by pole 2 to the eye of the observer. Then still, another pole 3 will also subtend a different angle to the eye of the observer. So a ray from pole 3 also enters the eye of the observer. This is a ray of light from pole 1. And this ray also enters the eye of the observer. But the angle which is subtended by pole 1 will also be different from the other angles that is subtended by pole 2 and pole 3. So if we call this beta, so this is the angle which is subtended by pole 1 to the eye of the observer. So now, dear learners, what we are going to observe in this point is that the object which is very close to the observer will appear bigger than the object which is far away from the observer. Now, these angles from which we view these objects, or the angles which are subtended to the eye of the observer by these 3 different poles, is what we call the visual angle. So in the visual angle, size of objects will be the same, but we shall view it that in a way that the objects will appear to be of different sizes. So this is what we term as the visual angle. So now, dear learners, since we said these objects subtend different angles to the human eye, so now let's also look at some of the optical instruments that we have, because these optical instruments, they also change the visual angle of these objects. When they change, what we see through the instrument will now be different from the original size or the height of the object. So now, what are the examples of these optical instruments? Examples of optical instruments. What are these instruments that changes the visual angle, or what are the examples of these instruments that changes the visual angle? So now, the first example that we have is the cameras. The cameras. When we take photo using a camera, we shall find that the size of the object will be different from the size of the image that will be formed on the screen of the camera. In the camera, we have what is called the film. So the image will be formed on the film, and that film is the same like the screen. So now the size of the image will be different from the size of the object, which means the camera has changed the visual angle of the object. Then another example of this instrument that will change the visual angle is the telescope. The telescope. So in also a telescope, the size of the object will be different from the size of the image. The telescope will change the visual angle. That is the angle that is subtended by the object to the human eye. Then another example of this instrument is the periscope. Periscope. So the periscope will also change the size of the object, meaning it has changed the angle which is subtended by the object to our eye. Then we have also what is called the binoculars. Binoculars. The binoculars. So this is also another example of the optical instrument. Then the other examples that we have the projector. The projector. The projector also changes the visual angle. As we know, projectors always display images which are always bigger than the object. So the image that will be displayed by a projector is bigger than the object, which means the projector shall have changed the visual angle. That is the angle that is subtended by the object to the human eye. Then another example that we have is the microscope. So the microscope or a microscope also changes the visual angle. Microscopes are used to view small objects. There are other objects that are very small that we cannot view using our normal eyes. So we use the microscope. So the microscope will magnify the object, meaning it will make the object bigger than what it is. So when it makes it bigger, which means it has changed the angle which is subtended by that object to our eye, which means it has increased the visual angle. So dear learners, these are the examples. These are some of the examples of optical instruments that we have. There are still so many optical instruments. So now what we are going to do, we shall look at all these optical instruments one by one. We shall look at the camera and how an image will be formed in the camera. We shall also look at the telescope, how image will be formed in a telescope, and all these optical instruments. So now, dear learners, as we say, these instruments changes the visual angle, or the angle which is subtended by the object to the human eye. Now let's look at the structure of the human eye, how the human eye appears, and how images will be formed on the human eye. Let's look at the human eye. So the human eye is one of the sense organs found on the human body, and it is used for seeing objects. We use the eye to see objects. So it is one of the sense organ in the body, and its work is for view, or we use it for seeing objects. So dear learners, let's keep a look at this structure of the human eye. This is how the human eye appears. So dear learners, this is what we call the human eye, or this is the structure of the human eye. So now the human eye has very many parts. It has very many parts, but we are going to concentrate on some of the few parts. Like we have the lens, which helps in the formation of the image. We shall also have the retina, which is where the image is formed. It is also the same like the screen of the eye. So those are the few parts where we are going to concentrate on. So now the human eye has the following parts. We have the lens. This is the lens, and the lens helps to refract rays that enters the human eye. Then also we have what is called the pupil. The pupil is this space which is found between the iris. So this part is called the iris. So now the space found between or in the middle of the iris is what we call the pupil. Then the outer part of this human eye is called the cornea. It's called the cornea. Then the part to which the eye lens is attached is called the ciliary ligament. The ciliary ligament. Then in the human eye, there are some fluids that are always found in the human eye. There's one fluid which is called the aqueous humor. The aqueous humor. Then also there's another fluid which is called the vitreous hammer. So these fluids, we know fluids always help to reduce friction. Then we also have a part which is called the retina. The retina is the same like the screen of the eye. This is where an image will be formed. Then we have this part with a contraction. It is called the fovea. Then we also have a part called the blind spot. Then we have a group of nerves which is called the optic nerve. So this optic nerve is the one that sends information from the human eye to the brain. Once an image has been formed on the retina, it is the optic nerve that sends the image, or it is the one that sends the information to the brain. The brain will interpret and say, okay, this is a human being, this is a tree. Then we have a part called the choroid. Then we have the muscles. The muscles will help in the contraction and dilation of the eye. Then we also have the sclerotic. This is the white part of the eye. So now, dear learners, we are going to concentrate on some of them, on some few parts of the human eye. So one, we are going to start with the retina. The retina. Now, looking at this structure of the eye, this is what we call the retina. This is the retina. So now, dear learners, what is the function of the retina in the human eye? So the retina is where the image is formed. This is where the image is formed. Which means when we view any object, when you see an object and you understand that that is a human being, it means that an image has already been formed on the retina. If no image has been formed on the retina, we shall not understand that this is a human being or this is a tree. So for us to understand that this object is like this, it is because an image will be formed on the retina. And the retina is the same like the screen. Always images are always formed on the screen. So the screen of the eye is called the retina. That is where the image is formed. Then the next part of the human eye that we are also going to concentrate on is the lens. And dear learners, this is the lens found in the human eye. So now we said there are two types of lenses. One is called the convex lens and one is called the concave lens. So now, dear learners, the type of lens which is found in the human eye is the convex lens. And the convex lens is the type of lens which is thicker in the middle than at the edges. So we can see that the lens found in the eye is of the same type as the lens found in other optical instruments. We shall come to look at the periscope, the telescope, the camera. We shall find that the human eye and all these optical instruments, they have this lens. So now, what is the function of the lens in the human eye? So now we say the lens, it refracts rays. It refracts rays and focuses it on the retina. So the lens refracts rays and focuses it on the retina, which means when a ray of light enters our eye, so when it touches the lens, and since this is a convex lens, the ray will always converge to a certain point. So the point where the ray will converge, that is the point where the image will be formed. So now the lens in the eye will focus the image to be formed on the retina or on the screen of the eye. Then, dear learners, the next part of the human eye that we are also going to concentrate on is the iris. 3 is the iris. Iris. So looking at the structure of the human eye, this is what we call the iris. And the iris is the one that forms the color of the eye. So now, dear learners, what is the function of the iris in the human eye in relation to the formation of image? So now the iris, as we can see, it helps to either, the iris, what it does is it closes and it opens depending on the intensity of the light that enters the human eye. Which means if the light entering the human eye has high intensity, so the iris will close a bit, so that the amount of light entering the human eye will be controlled. If the light entering the eye is minimal or it is of low intensity, then we shall find that the iris opens. So now the function of the iris is to control the amount of light entering the human eye. So it controls the amount of light entering the human eye. Entering the human eye. Which means also the amount of the light entering the human eye will also determine the brightness of the image that will be formed on the retina. So, dear learners, let's also look at another part that is still of importance that we have to concentrate on in our lesson. So we are going to also look at the optic nerve, because once the image has been formed on the retina, the image is not going to remain on the retina, which means the image has to be sent to the brain so that the brain can interpret what the eye has seen. So we can say this is a human being when the image has been formed in our retina and the information or the message has been sent to the brain. So now the part that sends the information or the message to the brain is called the optic nerve. So that is part 4. Let's call it the optic nerve. Optic nerve. And dear learners, from the structure of the eye, this is what we call the optic nerve. So the function of the optic nerve is to send message to the brain. And what is this message that is being sent by the optic nerve to the brain? The message is the image. The image that has been formed on the retina is the image that the optic nerve sends to the brain. So dear learners, these are some of the important parts that we have to concentrate on during the lesson. So now, the lens, what you have to know is the lens found in the human eye is the convex lens. And convex lens always refract rays to a certain point, which means rays of light incident on a convex lens will be refracted to one point, or we say they converge to one point. And that point where the image will be that point where the image will converge is called the retina. And I said the retina is the same like the screen of the human eye. So now, the focusing of the image on the human eye will also depend on the ability of the eye to adjust the focal length of this lens so that the image will be formed on the retina. Which means if the human eye has no ability to adjust its focal length, which means the image can either be formed in front of the retina or behind the retina. And when an image has been formed in front of the retina or behind the retina, we shall not be able to see the object clearly. And that one can only happen if we have some high defects. There are defects where the eye is able to see near objects clearly than far objects, or we can see far objects clearly than near objects. So those conditions are called the defects. But now without those defects, the image must be formed on the retina. So now, deformation, we have to note that the formation of the image, the formation of the image on the retina depends on the ability of the eye to adjust its focal length. Which means if the human eye is not able to adjust the focal length is the distance between the center of the lens and the principal focus. And in this point, the principal focus becomes the retina. That is where the image is formed. So now, the image can only be formed on the retina if the eye is able to adjust its focal length so that the image will be formed exactly on the retina. So now, dear learners, this ability of the human eye to focus an image on the retina, or the ability of the human eye to adjust its focal length, is called accommodation. Accommodation of the eye. Accommodation of the eye. So dear learners, you can be asked, define accommodation of the eye. So accommodation of the eye refers to the ability of the eye to adjust its focal length so that rays can be focused on the retina. So accommodation refers to the ability of the eye to adjust its focal length so that an image can be formed on the retina. Which means if the human eye cannot adjust the focal length, so we shall find that the image will either be formed in front of the retina or behind the retina. So now, dear learners, what characteristics do the image that is formed on the retina have? So let us look at the characteristics of image formed in the human eye, formed in the eye. Now, what are the nature of the image formed on the human eye? So now, as we can see, the human eye is just very small here, found in our head. It is just very small, which means the image that will be formed must also be smaller than the object. Because when we look at a human being looks bigger. But now, the whole size of the human being cannot be formed in the small human eye that we have, which means the image which is formed on the retina is smaller than the object. And an image that is smaller than the object is called a diminished image. So we say the image is diminished. The image is diminished, meaning an image which is formed in the human eye is smaller than the object. Then 2, when you see an object which is standing upright and the information has been sent to the brain that that object is standing upright, which means the image which is formed is also upright. When you look at an individual who is standing, the brain will interpret also that the image which is formed is also standing, which means we say the image formed in the human eye is upright. Or we use the word erect. So image formed in the human eye is upright or erect. So now, since this is a convex lens, which means the rays will be refracted from this lens to the retina. So when they are refracted, they will meet at the retina. And when an image is formed by the real intersection of rays, we say that image is a real image. So the image formed in a human eye is a real image. A real image is an image which is formed by an actual intersection of rays. Or we say a real image is an image that is formed on the screen. And we say the screen of the eye is the retina. The retina is where the image of an object is formed. So dear learners, these are the characteristics of the image that will be formed in the human eye. The image will be diminished, meaning smaller than the object. The image will be upright, that is, it will appear the way you are looking at the object. Then the image will be real, meaning it is formed by real intersection of rays, or it is formed on the screen, and we say the screen is called the retina. So dear learners, these are some of the important points that we have to note about the human eye. So we have looked at, we introduced optical instruments. We said these are devices that changes the visual angle. And we said visual angle is the angle which is subtended by an object to the human eye. And we said an object which is far away appears smaller than an object which is closer to the observer. So up to this point, dear learners, I would like to say thank you for attending the lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. I am teacher Akena Patrick Omoy. Bye bye for now.